All right, folks, we're going to get ready to go live here in just a couple of seconds here, so y'all can get settled in and be aware that in about 1 minute we will be going, continuing. So I'm going to be leaving this on, and I'll be introducing everybody just in a few minutes. All right, let's put that right about there. Get Matt in there.
All right. Ring. All right. Just to let you know, we are doing Facebook Live. We've come to find that we do find a few people meander onto that and kind of enjoy it. And plus, we get to rebroadcast on Facebook. Our Hometown Novel Nights Facebook page. And it'll also be posted on our new website, which is hometownnovel.com. And this program, Hometown Novel Nights, I don't know how many of y'all have ever been to a Hometown Novel Night program, which began actually where I ate lunch today at Rogers Barbecue in Hogansville back in 2018. Tony Stridling and her husband Randy have been phenomenal supporters of everything, the concept that we were trying to do of introducing local authors to local audiences south of Atlanta. That was our motto from the beginning. But we eventually got invited and to be co-hosted by the Newnan Carnegie Library, downtown Newnan. We have found ample ways to have our books promoted with Corner Arts Gallery, which is a wonderful little specialty shop right next to the old Scott's Bookstore. How many of y'all have been to downtown Newnan and can remember Scott's Bookstore? I'm so glad that Josh opened up here. There's Josh back there. I want to give him a round of applause for it. Josh, I can remember first meeting Josh when they were still over there by the hospital, and walking in there, he amazed me how he could put so many books in such a little tiny spot. And then, on the other side of all of our little disruption in life for about the last 2.5 years, he was able to get this building and move into this. This bookstore, pretty good books here in LaGrange, I promise you, is one of the best bookstore locations, venues that you will find anywhere. And I've been to bookstores, from Florida to the Carolinas, all the way up to New Jersey, actually, and up into Cincinnati. This is a truly unique treasure, what Josh has been able to accomplish here. So I'm glad to see he gets a lot of support from all of y'all. Josh and I started talking almost a year ago about the premise of beginning to put some author programs here, and this year we're going to be doing, obviously, this one here today. We already have June 11th set up. It'll be a children's book featured event, and we're going to have some children authors here. That'll be covering pretty much the same kind of panel discussion, except from the children's side of things. So grab your grandchildren and your own children to come back for that in June. And then October, we're working on one more this year, and that is to be notified. That's so far in advance. I try not to get too many booked out that far in advance. But I wanted to fill you in just a little bit about the Hometown Novel Night program as we're getting settled here. And I want to make sure I got my notes here. Today, matter of fact, okay, so even today, Hometown Novel Nights has a bunch of authors now in our stables, I guess you might want to say that term. We've got several authors that are in Warm Springs today. They're having their spring fling, so that's their spring festival over there. And Warm Springs Cellars has been a wonderful little quaint venue right there in downtown Warm Springs. And Miss Sonia Adams there has been an advocate for us for the last, well, this is into our third year going in and out of there with different author programs there. And so we've got authors there today. And then actually, my wife and I are going to go over there tomorrow and spend tomorrow afternoon. Now, there's an advantage of being the founder of Hometown Novel Nights. I picked the 70+ degree weather day. The other ones are out there in the 50-degree weather. But that, you know, just that's a Lord thing, not me. So I just wanted you to be aware of that from that side of things. Here's some really good news. Okay. How many of y'all have heard in the past about the Southern Literary Festival in downtown Newnan? It got canceled twice. Well, guess what's happening on June 3rd through 5th? First weekend in June, the Newnan Carnegie Library Foundation is hosting the Southern Lit Fest in downtown Newnan. And they have a wonderful trove of nationally acclaimed authors that will be there, plus a lot of local authors that are part of our Hometown Novel program and others. I believe I can share this much. I am pretty much 100% sure that Sean Dietrich will be one of the featured authors that will be there. So if you are familiar with Sean of the South and his book, he's going to be there. He's one of those that will be there. So that'll be taking up all of downtown Newnan, from the train depot to the library to the courthouse and a couple of other venues over that weekend. So I'm so glad it's finally happening. Thank goodness the good Lord had mercy on us and got rid of this little bug that keeps popping its head up. And also, we are beginning right now the planning of the Sharpsburg Book Fair in Sharpsburg, Georgia, in the Old Town area, on August 27th. And we'll be having a lot of authors available for all of y'all to meet, greet, a big one-day book fair event there. Sharpsburg is being wonderful to us and offering their facilities, their support and encouragement. We're going to be raising money for a couple of scholarships for high school students to attend the Atlanta Writers Conference. One of the other things that we're trying to do is Hometown Novel Writers Associations being formed, is we're going to be also supporting First Readers, and it's spelled F-E-R-S-T. First Readers supplies books to registered youngsters from the time that they're born until they're 5. In other words, preschool. They get a book every month for $40 a year. So every time we raise $40, we're registering another child to be a part of that program for a year. So if you ever see that opportunity, please support any of the First Readers programs. I was up in Polk County 2 weeks ago and was able to work up enough money to donate for a couple of the young readers ourselves. So that was awesome when I was there. And on that note, by the way, the mayor of Sharpsburg, not all authors make a living doing selling books. We do other things. I just happen to be retired, so this is the only thing I do. But the mayor of Sharpsburg now is Blue Cole. Blue was one of the very first Hometown Novel Night authors. He's got his thriller series that he's written. Now, he's been pretty busy helping Sharpsburg grow, but he has been a big supporter of everything we're doing, which is why we ended up with Sharpsburg as a supporter. So, and matter of fact, on April 30th, we'll be having an author roundtable book talk there at Sharpsburg's Old Town Library, which is about half the size of this room. And we're just going to squeeze everybody in and have some fun. So enough of the advertisement that I don't get paid to share. All right. Y'all are here to meet 4 wonderful authors, each one of them tied somehow to either mystery, murder, or mayhem, or all of the above. And you're going to get a wide genre mix here. And with Matt Smith, Angela McCrae. Let's see, Matt's from Newnan, Angela McCrae's from Newnan, Mike Nemeth is from Villa Rica, and Clay Bryant is right here. And a lot of y'all know Clay. He's being the local boy from that side of things. So how we'll work this today, again, is I'm going to introduce each author, give them about 15 to 20 minutes of interactive discussion about who they are, what was their writing journey about, and a little bit about the latest books that they've put out, so that you can begin to think about some questions you may want to ask each. And then we'll have a general Q&A at the very, very end. So with that, we're going to begin with Matt Smith. He's a corporate attorney, would be the best way to say it. He's not trying murderers and all that kind of stuff, or one way or the other. But he's also a fabulous writer, and he just recently put out his first novel, which is one of the best first novels that I have ever written, ever read. It is better than the first one I did, I guess. So 20 Mile was awesome. But he's going to speak a lot about that. And so, he's got a great background. His education was in North Carolina at Davidson College, but you got your law degree in Emory. In Georgia. Okay, Georgia. Yeah, I should read my own notes. That's all right. And he's also been a member of our hometown novel writers group. So I was pleased to see we got a preview of 20 Mile in a manuscript form a couple of times. So it was great to see it finally get out and get published. 20 Mile, I'll just give you this little hint about it. This is from the blurb about his book. When wildlife biologist Alex Lowe is found dead inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, it looks on the surface like suicide, but will you say her name?
Sure, it's Chula.
Chula
Walker.
I knew I was going to mess that up. It's T-S-U-L-A, Chula Walker, a special agent with the National Park Service's Investigative Services Branch and a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. She's not so sure that it was what it appears to be. So this novel is phenomenal, and I'm going to let him tell you a lot more about it. But he earned this review, which basically says, in C. Matthew Smith's engrossing novel 20 Mile, a Park Service biologist turns up dead in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and discord regarding annexed land fuels a treacherous chase, a disturbing, potent thriller about ownership and trespassing, as well as unrealized dreams and aggression. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Matt Smith. Matt, begin by telling us a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Mike. First of all, I do want to thank Mike and Hometown Novel Nights for all of their support since I joined the organization. I was in the process at that point, I guess, of finalizing the contract for the novel, and the support that y'all have provided me has been fantastic. It's really great to be here, to see some friends in the audience, and to be in this room in particular. I was browsing earlier and seeing some novels in here that are absolutely foundational to how I write, because they were novels that I read that really sort of showed me the way. And if anybody wants to know later on, I'll talk your ear off about those in here as well. My own novel writing journey, or my own creative writing journey, I guess, because I do write short stories too. It's not unique in that it started in childhood, right? I mean, I was a reader, and growing up with parents who were fairly strict in many ways, but one thing that was never off the table were books, and I read widely, and I read the classics. I read Thomas Harris's Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon at probably a far too young an age. But I read everything that I could get my hands on. And somewhere along in there, I thought, I'd really like to do that. When I went to college in North Carolina, I thought I was going to get an English degree, go on to graduate school, and teach English while I wrote. I did get the English degree. But then I ended up along the way getting redirected to law school for various reasons, and 20-ish years of career, marriage, child, all of those things sort of intervened. I actually think in my particular case it was a good thing. There are some people who are young, in their 20s and early 30s and writing fantastic books, but for the most part, I think a lot of people need a goodly amount more life experience before they write anything that's of interest. That's why you see a lot of the younger MFA writers writing sort of the same story over and over again, I think. So it was a good thing for me that I didn't try to write anything for quite a while. There were a few times along the way where I would have an inkling of an idea, and I'd sit down at whatever laptop I had at the time, and I'd start banging out some words, and inevitably the tide of job and parenthood and whatever else would sort of drown that out. And the truth of the matter is they just weren't that good, the ideas. They had no staying power. So about 4 years ago, I had an idea that popped in my head, and like I did with a lot of them, I let it stew for a bit, sat down, wrote a few words, and I waited to see if it would stay. And the idea in the beginning was very skeletal. It was the idea of I'm going to say good guy, and guy in the gender neutral sense, a good guy on the run from bad guy or bad guys in a difficult outdoor environment. I love the outdoors. Ever since I went to college in North Carolina, I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by all kinds of beautiful settings. Spent a lot of time in Western North Carolina in those 4 years, and even afterwards in law school, I would go up to North Georgia and then into Western Carolina on weekends to go hiking and paddling and whatnot. So when I decided that I had this idea for good guy running from bad guys in difficult environment, the setting was fairly simple. I knew where I needed to set it because I had a place that I was familiar with. Now, from there, all the other questions were still on the table. Who is my good guy? Who are my bad guys? Why are they in conflict? Why is there? Why would one be on the run from the other? So I had to sort of figure all of that out. I am not what you would call a plotter. When you write, you sort of fall into one of two categories. You're either a plotter or what they call a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants. I don't know what's going on in my story for the most part until I start writing it. It's a little bit like archaeology in that sense. You're chipping away and brushing away and figuring out what's underneath. But eventually what I figured out, because we've been spending some time, my family, up in Western Carolina again, on the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park up in Bryson City and going into the park. And I started looking and researching the history of the park, and I learned something that I didn't know before, which was, I always knew that the land there was 2 centuries ago. It was Cherokee homeland. That part's easy. That 500,000 acres is part of a much larger Cherokee homeland that ended in the 1830s with removal. That part I knew. What I didn't know is a century later, that land was filled with settlers, European settlers, timber companies that were clear cutting, and all sorts of other people who had moved in the vacuum, often encouraged by the government. And then a century later, they realized that this gem of a natural environment was getting laid to waste. And so the states of North Carolina and Tennessee used eminent domain to forcibly buy up the land. And they had some private donations from up in the Northeast and whatnot, but they bought up the land and sort of shooed people off in order to constitute this park. So you've got then 2 generations of people, a century apart, with very hard feelings about this beautiful place that was theirs and then was lost. Well, that's fertile ground for Ryder. And so what I determined in this particular case was I have an antagonist who is aggrieved of the fact that a century ago his family, this is the story he's grown up with, his family had property in there, and they lost that property when the park was formed. And sort of the North Star of his life, and his daddy before him and his granddaddy before him, is that land was stolen from us. We didn't have a say in it, and we want it back. So that's my bad guy. My good guy then this is the other part of writing and the research that was a fun discovery, was the National Park Service has its own FBI. I didn't know this either. It's a small FBI. It's known as the Investigative Services Branch, and it's about 3 dozen, a little bit less than that, special agents who investigate the most serious crimes within the national parks. There are 8 million 80 million acres of national park from Alaska to the Virgin Islands. You have 33 special agents to cover all the territory. So the realities are, and I spent a lot of time, they were very generous, I spent a lot of time with the number 2 in command of the investigative services branch, talking about the day-to-day reality. But the take home for me was, you don't work in pairs. You know, it's not Mulder and Scully here. You don't have partners for the most part. You work alone a lot. You work in outdoor, remote environments often. You don't work with the benefit of, for the most part, of, you know, the fancy CSI fans and all of the forensics and everything. You are solving crimes sort of old school by yourself in places where something goes bad, it goes bad for you, and you're alone. So, you know, I wondered who would be attracted to that. You know, there may be any number of answers.
Put your mic closer to you, so
Okay.
you're in back.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm an old trial lawyer, so I didn't do criminal stuff, but I do try it. I'm used to not having the mic, so if you can't hear me, just raise your hand. I was curious, who would want to do that as a job? And there may be many answers to that, but the answer that I settled upon was somebody who was predisposed to time by themselves, but confident in their own abilities. And that person became the protagonist of my novel, Chula Walker. She is of Eastern Band of Cherokee descent. She has spent most of her adult life out west, away from her mother and where she grew up for various reasons that are explained in the novel, and she has returned to take care of her mother. So mother is sick and dying of cancer, but while maintaining her job. She is transferred into this particular region. And she gets tasked with looking into what appears to be a suicide. She's not certain, and she's not going to let it go until she figures it out. So I tell you all of that because my writing journey really was, I had an idea, and then I had to figure it out. And I started chipping away. And so much of writing is lonely by yourself, sort of banging away the keyboard, obsessing about it before you fall asleep, obsessing about it while you're brushing your teeth in the morning, trying to figure out what's the story, working out the little problems along the way. And 3 years after the fact, I had a novel that was finished and thankfully under contract with a very good little press out of Washington State. And you know, from there, that brings me here today. Really, this is my first novel. I'm working on another one. I occasionally will work on a short story when I need to take a break from the novel or I need to let it rest for a bit.
So Matt, let me ask you a question, a couple of
Sure.
questions, lead you here. Is there a particular author that you've read a lot of,
Mm-hmm.
who you would say, this is who I'm most like?
So many, but I'm gonna talk about one of the books that I referenced earlier. David Joy is an author out of Western North Carolina, and his novel "The Line That Held Us" is back there, and it's phenomenal. He is very much the writer that I aspire to be, and I hope I am, but he's been at it a lot longer. I love stories that are both literary in the sense that you can tell the person took time to construct the sentences, to think about the words they're using. They care about how it reads. And they care about the theme, and they care about doing characters that have depth to them. But the plots are also propulsive. So you get the best of both worlds. You get quality prose and a story that moves. And so David Joy's work, you can't go wrong with it. I could talk about him all day long. And so that is what I aspire to. He is from Western Carolina, and his novels very much deal with that particular setting, the people who populate that particular setting. And he comes at it really from a native's background. I mean, I'm not native. I spend a lot of time in the area, but I wouldn't pretend to be a native of the area. So his deal a lot with the culture of Western North Carolina and, you know, the parts that are ascendant, the parts that are disappearing.
That's good, because I think most all authors are good readers, and they know who they like, and it's okay to be like somebody that you've read. It's a good starting point, but you become your own voice, obviously. You've got a young son. Matter of fact, your wife's out with him today.
Yeah.
He's doing shooting or something today, in a competitive sense.
Yes. All legit.
You heard that, Clay. It's, well, purely competitive.
It's through 4-H.
So, when your son gets old enough to read your novel, what is the takeaway? What would you like him to take away from your novel?
Well, that's hard to encapsulate. What I hope he or anybody else reading it would come away with is just the idea that any place in this country that exists now in its particular state is built upon several strata of history before it. You know, I have this thought experiment that I challenge people to do, and it can be there, it can be here, it can be out west. Take where I'm sitting right now and say, all right, who owns it now? All right, and we can figure that out pretty simple. But go back a decade, who owned it then? Go back a century, who owned it then? Go back 2 centuries, and ask yourself, what happened that they don't own it anymore? You can go back far enough, you will find someone who is aggrieved of the fact that they don't have it anymore. And so that was just an interesting, it's just an interesting thought process that I don't know that we engage in too much in general, but I think it makes you, I think it can be something that makes you a more sensitive person when we talk about certain subjects. And so that was the most interesting part of the process of writing the book to me is trying to discuss and sort of modulate how everybody feels about this particularly beautiful place that anybody would want, but a lot of people have lost.
The more we go back in history, you know, the further we realize that, you know, the past is what it is, and it was constructed at the time of the circumstances that it took place in, and it has shaped who we are today. But that does not mean that we shouldn't learn from our past to improve on things, because obviously there's always been mistakes along the way, or situations and social environments have changed over the course of the ways. Anybody have a particular question you'd like to ask Matt at this point? Yes.
How long from beginning to end did it take you to write this book?
Sure. It took me 2 years to get the manuscript to the point that it was ready to be submitted. Once the publisher took it, then we went through developmental editing. So it was really 3 years until it was ready for print, and then it took longer after that for it obviously to be published. But the writing, and I don't think we weren't done until a couple of months before we went to printer, because I was constantly tweaking and having my editor pull his hair out.
That's my husband.
Yeah.
So it's the norm.
Yeah. I don't think I'm unique in that sense.
Okay.
I'm very slow at writing. I've finally, after a year, finished the first rough draft of a new novel. It just takes a while.
You mean you don't have a staff of editors and ghostwriters and things of that nature helping you out?
I don't. It is just me and
Y'all want to know why, you know, James Patterson and John Grisham and all of them can throw out books every 6 months. Trust me, they don't do that alone. So, yeah, the average book takes, each of y'all can all answer that question, you know, it just doesn't happen. It gets easier, but it's still a long process. Yeah, absolutely.
Question here.
Yes.
Did you have to find an agent to lead you to the publisher, or?
I did not. So in my particular case, I went a somewhat non-traditional route in that I was querying agents at the same time I was querying certain smaller presses. The big 4, big 5, depending on who you talk to, and then the next strata below that, in terms of money, they require an agent before they'll even look at your manuscript. So I was submitting to agents, and I had some nibbles, but I also was submitting to smaller presses that I knew what they put out. I liked the books that they put out, and they didn't require that. And so, lo and behold, one of those presses that I liked what they put out, decided to take a chance on it. And so, it's one of those things, would you love to have the agent? Absolutely. The next manuscript, when it's ready, will I be querying agents again? I absolutely will. Because it just opens more doors. But that doesn't mean you have to have one, and there are really good smaller presses out there that will look at your manuscript without it being submitted by an agent.
That's a good question, because the publishing realm is changing almost month to month to month. There's still obviously the big, Simon & Schuster and HarperCollins and all of those. But what I would tell you, unless you are very fortunate like Delilah Owens, Where the Crawdads Sing, that was her first novel. First novel, best-selling book for like 2 years. That's crazy. And she's my age. That's even crazier to be able to do that. From the standpoint of being a first-time novelist and be able to have an agent and get you signed to a big contract, that is very, very much an exception. A credit to Story, really, but it's an exception. It helps to have Oprah Winfrey kind of bless you, and Reese Witherspoon put her anointment. And by the way, that movie's coming out soon. But what Matt's explaining is what happens. It takes several books in your resume to be able to pull in a platform of readers that gets the attention of the agents, that gets the attention of the publisher. And not everybody does it. There are a lot of nationally published, traditionally published authors who have actually stepped back and independently published themselves because they have the platform. They don't need all of that aggravation.
Yeah, I mean, the good and the bad of the bigger presses is if they decide to put their full weight behind you, then publicity is much simpler. It's not to say you're not participating, but it's much simpler to get the readership. And they have the ins with book clubs and other things that can help bring the readership. Independent presses, you're doing a lot more of it yourself. And there's a lot of sleeves rolled up time spent marketing when otherwise you might want to be writing. So that's the good and the bad of that. But that's not to say, and like Mike said, there are a lot of really talented writers who are out there who have decided that I'd rather go the small press route, or the big presses take so much more. Your royalties are so much less out of every sale. So there's good and the bad with each of those.
Get involved in a good writers group, a good critique group, good writers group. Get the platform, the connections, and the network. And you'll kind of answer your own questions based on what your goals are, what you consider to be success in your mind, or what you want to do with your book. And that's the best advice I would give to anybody. They've all heard this from me more than once. If your goal in writing a book is to make, a bunch of money and quit your day job, go flip hamburgers at McDonald's. Be realistic. If you're that successful, it's because somebody like Delilah Owens got blessed somehow, and it turned out that way. You write the very, very best book you can. So with that, anybody else have any more questions for Matt before we move on? And we will do Q&A at the end if you come up and think again. Well, I'd like to move to a good friend of mine, Angela McCrae. I'm surprised Alex is not here with the. Yeah, he's busy writing, yeah. Alex has just put out her husband just put out his first novel, but he's been writing and writing and writing. He's a ghostwriter. He does column writing for the Newnan Times Herald. He's been a reporter, just like Angela had been for the Newnan Times Herald. Angela got smart and retired from that, and she's now an editor. So I try to buddy up to her when I can. So, but She is currently a freelance editor, writer, blogger in Noonan, Georgia. Hopefully the new publisher and editor for the Hometown Novel newsletter that we're going to be starting up, hopefully on a monthly basis. I think we have enough information to do that. In early 2016, she published A Year of Tea Time Tales, a collection of 52 tea-themed short stories. In 2011, she published her first book, Dainty Dining, a cookbook in history of department store tea rooms. So you've got a theme here going. Okay, she has written 2 cozy mysteries and have outlines for many, many more. In fact, she says, I have more ideas for books than I will ever be able to write, which is a lovely problem to have. And that just speaks of Angela's very humble personality. She will soon be the editor and main contributor, which I already said that, never mind, I'll rephrase it. Her most current book is the second in her series, Rubies and Revenge. Actually, I have read both of her books to the book club at one of the senior assisted living facilities in Noonan, and they loved it. They could connect with the tea imagery, the cats, and all the jewelry stuff. And I'm not going to say much more. I'll let you do the rest of that story fascination. But does anybody here like the cozy mystery kind of genre? You know, the small town stuff going on, figuring out the Agatha Christie. Well, here's our Agatha Christie here in Coweta County, that now stepping into Troup County today. And I think you're going to enjoy listening to Angela as she talks a little bit about herself. So, Angela, fill in some blanks that I didn't cover about yourself first.
Great, thank you all for coming today. It's nice to be asked to talk about my book with a captive audience. That's always fun. And I'm glad that Mike started out a little by asking who here is familiar with cozy mysteries, because sometimes I have people say they don't know what that is. And in that case, I generally do bring up Agatha Christie as the classic one. But I grew up reading Nancy Drew. Did anybody? Okay, Nancy Drew. I read The Hardy Boys too, Trixie Belden, all those kind of things. I loved those books. I never aspired to write one, but I sure enjoyed reading them. And when I was in school, I was, of course, a voracious reader, and I ended up going to college and majoring in journalism. And when I got out of school, I got a job at the Noonan Times-Herald as a general assignment reporter. Quickly realized that was not really for me. I did fine at it, but I didn't like covering the cop beat and city councils and the school board and all that stuff. Was just kind of boring to me. I always wanted to do the people features, as we called them, as if there was anything else to do a feature on. You know, everything else couldn't just be a cat feature or a dog feature. Most of them were people features. And just for fun, I thought I would tell you some of the fun things I did in my career. I always loved to go out and interview the people who are gardeners, or interview gardeners, especially with spring coming around. You know, those people are always nice and had great mental health. And I decided it was because they spent so much time in the garden. Collectors were always fun. I remember a man who was just an old country farmer, wore his little overalls, and he had like 1,000 sets of salt and pepper shakers and had a whole room devoted to them. And I thought that's the kind of small town thing that I'll bet they were not doing at the New York Times that day, you know? So that was kind of fun for me to get to do. There was a local woman who was one of the first, and maybe even the first female pilots for Eastern Airlines. So that was fun to talk about her, and she was restoring an old home in Noonan. I thought that was neat. Are any of you Gone with the Wind fans, by any chance? Oh, got a couple, good. Well, at the time, one of the largest collections of Gone with the Wind memorabilia in the world was owned by a local man, Herb Bridges. Some of you may have heard of him. He ended up becoming a good friend of mine, so Herb kept me in the loop with all things Gone with the Wind. There were lots of opportunities to go cover feature stories related to the movie, and of course another colleague and I, who were big Windies, as Gone with the Wind fans are called, we signed up for that right off the bat. In 1989, it was the 50th anniversary of the movie, and I actually got to interview Butterfly McQueen when she came to Atlanta. She played Prissy in the movie. And I got to interview her despite the fact that nobody told me Butterfly didn't like to be touched. Well, I met our local museum director. We drove up to Atlanta together to get Miss McQueen, and I made the grave mistake of touching her because she was going around the bus station looking like she didn't know, you know, who her handlers were going to be for the day. And I just said, Miss McQueen? And she immediately started screaming at the top of her lungs and running through the bus station and almost did not go to Noonan. So that was what a great job I did. That's pretty representative of my life. That's kind of how I roll. But we ended up, you know, she understood that I was not there to harm her. And she had some, you know, reasons she didn't want to be touched like that. But who knew? You know, Herb later said, oh, I should have told you, you need a table between Butterfly. Don't let anybody touch her. So So there's a picture of me standing back like this and book signing with her later that day. I was not gonna touch her. But she ended up being a neat person, and she was talking a lot about, what it was like filming the movie and how she told Vivian Lee, if you don't slap me, I'll yell as hard as I can. But if you do slap me, I'm just gonna whisper. So that way she made sure she didn't really get slapped. It just looks like it in the movie. So in case you wanna know. Then later, that was an in-person interview. I got to do a telephone interview with Cammie King Conlon, who played Bonnie Blue Butler, the little girl in Home of the Wind. So I think I may be one of the last surviving reporters who interviewed two Home of the Wind stars. That was sort of one of my claims to fame. Then later, Newnan really became a movie town. And so we started having lots of folks come to town, like, they did Fried Green Tomatoes and Driving Miss Daisy, things like that. Well, Kevin Costner was fresh off of Dances with Wolves, and he was coming to town to film The War. And a friend of mine was a publicist for that movie, and she said, would you like to go watch Kevin Costner filming? Well, how fast do you think I got there? So it was shorter than I expected, So it's one of those things, everybody says that about Hollywood, they never look like what you think. But those were just a few of the things that as a small town reporter I got to experience. And I thought that was actually pretty cool for a little small town in Georgia. And so all these things sort of went into my memory bank. I had a few brushes with royalty, sort of. One day the Duchess of York was in Atlanta, and they sent me to Riches to go do a feature story on her. So that was kind of cool, back before she and Andrew got in a lot of trouble. I got to see her talk about teapots and stuff, which was sort of my thing. So I had been a newspaper reporter for many, many years until the newspaper actually bought a magazine, a glossy magazine called Newnan Coweta Magazine. I became the editor of that. And so the skills I had learned as a newspaper reporter easily transferred to writing magazine feature stories and editing them. And that was lots of fun. And during the course of that project, I got to work with an art designer who, to my great surprise, had been a book designer and gone all over the world printing books for people before she came to the Newnan Times-Herald. She was very quiet, and she was one of those people who's just so talented and so humble about what she can do. I'm more familiar with people who are very loudmouthed about what they can do who aren't that talented. I don't know if y'all had that experience, but the quietest people sometimes are just the most brilliant. She was that way. And so as we worked together on the magazine over the years, she said, well, if you ever wanted to write a book about tea or something, I could design it for you and help you get it published. And I had never really aspired to that, even though I'd been collecting tea room recipes, and that was just kind of a hobby of mine, was to go into the tea world, visit tea rooms, collect teacups, that kind of thing. Well, I've been collecting these postcards of old department store tea rooms for years, like Riches and Marshall Field and all those places. Some of you ladies may remember those places. And I wanted a way to make my collectibles tax deductible. So I decided that if I wrote a book about it, it would be a business expense. And that's just the business woman for me, And so my friend said, yes, we'll do this book. Well, we did it. Lo and behold, it was a hit. I ordered hundreds of copies, and they sold out, and then ordered a few hundred more, and they sold out. And then I didn't order anymore, because this was back before we had Amazon and print on demand and that kind of thing. And I didn't like warehousing books. I just wanted to write. I think most of us have that in common. We don't want to be the packager and shipper and warehouser for books. We just want to write them. And so I set that aside, but my friend said she wanted to save me the PDFs of the book, and she said, one day you'll want to get that in print again. And I said, well, no, I don't think so. I've more than made my money back. I've had fun, done book signings, da-da-da. Anyway, thanks to her urging, I put it up on Ingram Spark, so that that's a little distributor that made it available on Amazon, and I sell copies of that book every week, which just kind of cracks me up, because I was just going to sort of set those aside. I thought that was nothing, but it taught me. This was in 2011, and I heard a podcast just yesterday that said in 2012, the world of self-publishing changed forever and became unignorable. And I found that very, very interesting, because I think I was a year ahead of the game for once in my life. Usually I'm a late bloomer, but in that case I was a little early. So in 2011, my first book came out. I was still editing a magazine, and in 2013, my husband retired from journalism. And journalism was going through a lot of changes. Papers were consolidating. They were asking people to do more and more jobs, and without any more and more money, that kind of thing. So I thought, well, this is a good time for me to do something different and see if I can start my own editing and writing business. And so I did, and I was just surprised at how, I hate to say easy, but it really was easy to get new jobs. I had nonprofits who were coming to me asking me to write press releases. There were, in addition to the PR kind of jobs, there were so many places on the internet who were advertising interest, you can get you a side gig pretty easily by just doing a little looking online. And one thing I did, I wrote a year-long peer-reviewed paper for the German Historical Institute about a department store in Virginia. Now, that's not the most obscure thing ever, but it was a department store called Thalheimer's, which was very important because they had helped some Jewish people escape from Nazi Germany, and this was sort of hidden within the bowels of the company. You know, they were sort of doing it on the side, and are any of you World War II history fans? I love me some World War II history. And so that was a lot of fun, and I already knew the retail background, and again, I'm buying Thalheimer's, doodads, and I'm wanting to put these in a book, and so it was easy to just transfer that to, I'll do this peer review project, and I was shocked when they hired me for that, because I have no PhD, I'm just a nobody from nowhere, as they say, but yep, lo and behold, I have my name on that today. I hung my shingle, and they have that on the internet. I became a book critic for Kirkus Reviews. Some of you may have heard of that. That's a place where a lot of folks like to have their books reviewed. I did that, and so that was another way that I was able to get some writing work done. And then I became a proofreader and a line editor for Red Adept Publishing, which is a small press that is in Gardner, North Carolina. And so that was how I had moved into the world of books, from the world of newspapers and magazines. I just like anything to do with writing and reading and words. And if there's an option out there, I want to know what it is. I keep hearing about new things authors are doing, and I want to know about them, and I want to do them. And so after I'd been working for Red Adept a few years, to my surprise, the company asked me, when they heard that I was about to be finished with my first cozy mystery, would I consider submitting to them? And I thought, well, okay, that just doesn't happen very often, and I found out later that they decline about 98% of the submissions. And if I had known that, I probably never would have submitted, because nobody likes to lose, but I'm really a sore loser. I don't like to, like if there's a Georgia-Alabama game, you do not want me in the room, because I'm just unbearable if the team doesn't win, they don't pull forward, that kind of thing. So that's kind of my journey from journalism to magazine writing to books, and so all of it is to me related in the sense that I like features, I like soft news, I like the women's things, as we say. I don't know if I can say that today, that may be sexist. There's supposedly no such thing as women's news anymore, but to me there was. I like the things that, I was at a book group in Sonora recently, and they said they like my books because they all have happy endings. The murderer gets caught, they know there's not going to be gratuitous sex and profanity and that kind of thing. They like the jewelry theme. Most cozy mysteries have a hook. It's either a hobby or cooking or something like that. My hook is jewelry collecting, because I like jewelry. And I like buying it and being able to write about it in the books. And so that's kind of how I landed from newspaper journalist to magazine editor to book editor and now novelist. So there you go.
Very boring background. I'd love to be at your dinner table with you and Alex. I mean, that would just be interesting for sure. So what I would probably like to ask at this point would be okay, I have read both of your books, the Cozy Mysteries. And there's this wonderful character, Emma Watson, who is a younger Miss Marple, who likes her trinkets and making a living selling baubles and things of nature that she makes. And you can talk about the first one a little bit, but the second one is the murder of the head of the Happy Hometown Christmas Bazaar in this little town of Roseland. And the body is found in Santa's gift bag on the platform, and the limp hand is hanging out of the bag. Needless to say, in a small town, that would turn heads. So, talk a little bit about Emma, and do a bridge from your first to your second novel, but focus obviously on that.
Okay, sure. Emma Madison is my main character, and her name is a tribute to my firstborn niece, whose name is Madison Horton. Actually, her real name is Ivy Madison Horton, but she doesn't like the Ivy, and I'm forbidden from using it, so I decided that Madison could be the character's name in the book. And so she's a former newspaper reporter, as I am, because, part of that write what you know thing. I knew that she could easily transition from the old job to her new hobby-based job, and I like jewelry enough to know enough to be dangerous about it, how to put things together and that kind of stuff. So in the first book, there's a murder in a small town antique shop. I'm always in antique shops. I came to LaGrange early so I could do some antiquing before I came here today and have the stuff in my car if anybody would like to see it afterwards. second book, though, I thought it would be really fun to knock off somebody. Because, you know, that's one thing about aging that nobody told me. You just get so much more laid back. You're in my 50s. I'm just like, if you're mean to me, I'm just going to kill you in my next book. You know, be nice to people. I'm just saying, or don't let me know your name, you know. And I just don't get as upset about things as I used to. But I sort of I really try very hard not to kill anybody based on a real life person. Because I've had some weird things happen with things that I've written almost, I won't say I'm magical and you know, or anything like that, but a friend of mine, I have 4 cozy series I'm lining up. This is just the first one. The 4th series, which will be way on down the line, occurs in a Victorian home in Carrollton, where a friend of mine is a dentist. Well, I had been writing sweetly this little chapter where somebody gets knocked off in the backyard of this home that's now a dentist office. And one day my friend calls me up and she said, "You won't believe what we've just happened here." Well, guess what? You know, a criminal had, that was on the run from the police and got shot, I think. And anyway, he ended up parking at her dental office and his body was found behind it. And that just sort of gave me the creeps because I'm just outlining this little book and I thought, I better be careful what I write here, you know. I don't know, just kind of a strange thing. Anyway, so with this story, it's not based on a real life, you know, one person I can point to, but we all know, I'll bet everybody does, that one person who moves to town and wants to tell everybody how things ought to be done. Have we ever liked that person? I think not. I think not. And, you know, the saying for many years was, if you don't like it here, Delta is ready when you are. And I don't know about you, I wanted to contribute to a GoFundMe for a few people. I'm like, really? You hate it here? How can I get you on a bus? If you're so smart, and, you know, a friend of mine says we need citizenship classes for new people to take, you know. And I don't mean that in the sense of, because I have friends who are from all over the world. I've got a new friend who's from Ukraine who lives in Minden. We get along famously. I've got, you know, northern friends that I get along with. But what I don't get along with is, I get along with them, I just leave them alone. You know, the person who tells you how it used to be done back in so-and-so. That is just not fun. So I thought, I'm going to make that kind of person be the person who gets bumped off because everybody's going to want to kill her. And there will be so many, you know, because we don't like that person. So that was how I came to make the villain just a generic representative of the know-it-all who moves to town and tells you how things ought to be done.
It becomes quite obvious very quickly why. But now the question in the story was who. So I'm going to let some questions be opened up so we can move forward. Any questions for Miss Angela? All right. Well, afterwards we'll have some more Q&A, and I'll you know, obviously times for you to come up and talk with Miss Angela personally. But her book is fabulous, especially for you cozy mystery people. All right. Mike Namath. Mike and I have been published together from the same publishing house. We've known each other for quite some time now. Mike is a Vietnam veteran, and that just tells you how old both him and I are. And been over a while, isn't it? Yeah. But you're also a former high-tech executive and have all this expertise and all of this. So, Mike, you know, you've written you're working on you. Well, you've written others than these, but Parker's Choice is the most recent.
Right.
And I've read
That was number 3.
That was number 3. I wanted to make sure I said that right. You know, so Mike, this book here is one of those that you'll journey from Atlanta to New Orleans, you know, in and out of graveyards, being chased and you know, fearing for your life. His opening will catch your attention very quickly. So you may not ever want to go to a pool with lanai around it, you know, with a strange lady in the pool. But this is a great story. He knows how to write a thriller, and I know he's working on his next new book as well. I've been honored enough to be doing some critiques of some of his manuscript, and Mike's got a very, very gifted ability to shape words and tell stories. So, Mike, tell us a little bit about your background more than I just did.
Well, these are 2 hard acts to follow, right? I was born and raised in Wisconsin. Went to the University of Wisconsin, get drafted, but my last military assignment was here in Georgia. And it dawned on me that I didn't have to go back to where they shovel snow. So I got here as soon as I could. I got here in 1973, and I've more or less been here ever since. I was imprisoned in Texas for a while. I spent some time running a business in Europe for a while. So I've been around the world, and in fact, my very first novel was written on long-haul airplane flights. So I used to have to fly repeatedly to India, Europe, Asia, and those were great airplane flights because I could write on my computer all the way back and forth. And that's mostly where the very first novel ever got written. But I got my idea that maybe I should write novels someday when between years of college, I had a job as a forklift operator in a paper mill. And my job only took 15 minutes out of every hour. I was a labor union person. And I learned how good that can be, actually. So for 45 minutes out of every hour, I would read books. And during that summer, I read every single book that John D. MacDonald ever wrote. Has anybody heard of John D. MacDonald? He's the guy, there's always a color in the title, and so forth. And I thought, those are the kind of books that I want to write. So they're not cozy. In fact, my favorite television commercial, which only happens at Christmas time, is when John Travolta is Santa Claus and Samuel L. Jackson wants to get on Santa's good list. And Travolta says, "Have you given up the naughty words?" And Jackson gives you that look that only he can give you. There are a few of Sam's words in my book, but no gratuitous sex. But people die. My person in this book, the dead person, I should say, is pulled out of the Chattahoochee River, okay, up in Gwinnett County, Atlanta. So these are a bit more hard-boiled is a term that can only be used by people who write like they did back in the 30s about detectives, but it's a bit more in that direction than the cozy direction.
You're dating yourself, Mike.
All the time. In fact, I did have an editor once say, "Can you use some references that are more current?" You know, instead of talking about people in the 40s and 50s. And I thought, well, I think so. So I did write a novel when I was young. I had a bad experience, and Clay, you'll have to just cover your ears, but I was actually arrested for a crime I didn't commit. And I was just absolutely outraged by that. How could that possibly happen to a nice boy from Wisconsin? And I got lucky because nothing ever ended up coming of it. I spent 3 days in a city jail in Savannah and learned what that felt like. You don't want to go there, folks. Believe me, you do not want to go there. So I was outraged, and I wrote a novel about that experience, and I still have all the rejection slips because it never went anywhere. And that goes back to Matt's comment. I think it was certainly better for me to become a much more experienced and mature person before I tried to do this seriously again. So I started writing in 2013, published my first novel in 2016. So it takes me a while, and that was why my wife asked that question of Matt. Matt, how long does it take you? Because my damn husband takes forever. Actually, my first drafts go very quickly. I generally start with something I want to say. So what's known in the business as the theme. What is this book really about? I start with a theme, and then I find characters who would do the things that would bring out that message, right? So every one of my books sort of has a message. The message of Parker's Choice is that the black and white morality we learn in churches and at our parents' knees really gets tested by real life, and you end up seeing that there's an awful lot of gray, and that the choices we make are not as easy as just yes or no. Will I or won't I do something? In this book, my lead character is a guy named Parker. Parker's actually a scientist. He's a very well-educated person, and he gets into trouble because in this beginning preface to the book, the prologue to the book, his wife commits a crime. She assaults someone with a gun, and he takes the blame, and he actually goes to prison. And as this book starts in the first chapter, he's been paroled, and she's got the idea that maybe their marriage is over. Maybe he's changed while he was in prison. She certainly has changed while he was away. And so she's considering divorce. So now, all of a sudden, this body gets pulled from the Chattahoochee River, and he thinks she did it. But the cops think he did it. And that's just the first of his problems. Because he's a parolee, his boss thinks he can convince him to commit corporate fraud. And all of a sudden, he's on the run from cops, he's on the run from crooks, and he's wondering who in all of this mess he should really be loyal to. And that's the moral question that really faces him. It gets even more complicated when he finds out that a guy who could be his birth father is involved in that corporate fraud. So now he has these ties on really all sides of him that he has to worry about. And it does become clearer to him after he's chased by a gun-wielding woman through a dark, scary cemetery in the New Orleans French Quarter. And then it dawns on him, okay, this is how all these pieces fit together, because the fraud and the murder are actually connected. So that's Parker's choice. I have actually drafted a fourth novel, looking for somebody who wants to publish it. But it's taken me a long time, and that's why my wife asked that question. She's like, when are you going to be done with this thing?
They all take time.
The other thing that I mean, as long as she's here, I may as well pick on her. But she can never be in a room watching a Georgia-Alabama football game with this woman, because only one would end up leaving the room.
Roll Tide. Sorry.
See, I knew it.
Somebody's gonna end up in a cozy mystery.
So there you go, Michael.
No, Mike, again, I have read Parker's Choice. I really got into the scenery because my wife and I lived in New Orleans for a period of time when I went to seminary. And so walking through, y'all do know, if you've been to New Orleans, their graves are not down in the ground. They up top. So it gets spooky there in New Orleans. Not to mention, I think that the city is more populated by ghosts than they are by actual citizens. But no, that's awesome. What would be your, I'm going to ask this two questions because I've asked this of Matt and whatnot. One, who is your favorite author? And number two, what would be your key takeaway from Parker's Choice for a reader?
Favorite author is really, really hard. Kind of like everybody else, I think, up here on the podium. I've done really a lot of reading, but there's a book right here on the shelf facing everybody called The Good German. And probably most people know about The Good German because it was a movie. And it was a popular movie. It was really a good movie. Well, the guy who wrote the book is a guy named Joseph Cannon. And not a lot of people have heard the name Joseph Cannon. He's written probably 8 or 10 novels, and they are all absolutely wonderful. But they're very different from what I write in the sense of location and topic. There's typically a lot of historical setting in Joseph Cannon's books. So one of his more recent ones is called Leaving Berlin, and it takes place right after the end of the Second World War. So he's different that way, but he's very much like me in terms of raising moral questions. His characters are all stressed to decide what is the right thing to do. And that's sort of what I write about. All those questions that come to us in our lives about what is the right thing to do. And can the right thing ever be the wrong thing to do in a circumstance? Which is really kind of what my fourth book is about. It's about a guy who has repeatedly done the right thing in very serious circumstances, and it tended to turn out poorly, not just for him, but for the people he was dealing with. So morality is a really complicated subject, and Joseph Cannon writes books about morality, moral questions, moral ambiguity, but I like a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, well, I mean, folks need to know that the Parker's choice has to deal with those decisions that Parker has to make through the story. So I will promise you, just when you get excited and you think you know what's happening to Parker, just wait to flip a page and things go awry real quick. It's a phenomenal novel, and Mike's done a fabulous job. Any questions for Mike?
And that's sort of a stylistic thing for me too. I think my books read like a movie. So I don't have a lot of dense paragraphs of narrative, where the writer is sort of just showing off that they know a lot of big words and things like that. Have you ever read Sophie's Choice, by the way? Oh my goodness. That man knows words that I had to look up, okay, William Styron. No, he's a fabulous writer, but that's a wholly different kind of style. My style is very clean. Everything moves really quickly, so from chapter to chapter, Parker's got problems.
Yeah, lace up your shoes because you're going to be traveling with Parker. That is very true, and I relate to that a lot. That's good for you, Mike. It really is. Any other questions, sir? All right. Well, let's move on so we can do an open Q&A at the end. Clay Bryant comes to us today, and we had the pleasure of having him at our January Hometown Novel Nights program in Newton, and I got to meet Clay at that time. What an interesting background. We were talking before. For some of you that may have heard the news, and maybe not, but this speaks of Clay. In my little town of Grantville last night, there was 3 people were murdered in a robbing of a gun club. And you don't, Grantville's more known for political intrigue than not that kind of stuff. So it was very sad. First thing Clay says to me, did you hear about what happened in Grantville? So that's Clay's connections, but he also knew the people that were murdered, and that's Clay's also long time connection and relationship with this area. But Clay is, he's been born and raised in Troup County, so he's one of your own. He began his career in law enforcement in 1973 as a radio operator with the Georgia State Patrol. That's the same year my wife and I got married. Wow. All right. And he moved on to go through as a youngest trooper in Georgia State Patrol. And then in 1980, he became police chief of Hogansville, Georgia. And you took over for your father, who had been the previous police chief. He had passed away. So from father to son as police chief in Hogansville, until he resigned in 1992 and entered the private sector. You're still currently doing active investigation work, kind of.
Actually, I retired January the 1st from the State Public Defender's Office, and prior to that, I was with the District Attorney's Office as an investigator.
So here's a man that has seen it. Some of us sit down as authors and writers, and we try to, employ our writing skills and research to write stories. Clay has had the wonderful advantage of living it. And your story with the solving the West Georgia murder of Gwendolyn Moore, you know, is one of those cold case scenarios to which he was blessed to be involved in. And, you know, this book has turned out to be, it's not easy to get published, and to, you know, with Arcadia in their history books. It's not easy. And his has been one of the best sellers that they've had since this came out. So that's a tribute to his ability to recount the facts and tell it in a way that gets people to jump on this story. So Clay, tell us a little bit more to fill in the blanks about your background and then what led up to obviously writing. We all took a couple of years to write our books. You were dealing with almost decades, I think.
Well, to be quite honest, I am the epitome of what Mark talks about, writing by the seat of your pants. My mother was avid. My daddy, he
Clay, hold the mic up here so they can hear you back.
my mother was an avid reader, and my dad, the only thing, he liked to read, but he liked to read factual things. And, I was blessed to pick up a lot from my mother. I read a lot as a kid, and, enjoy reading today. But I have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody that can take a theme and create it, and from there develop characters and a plot line and make it play out over time. And, you know, my writing is basically telling a life story, the things that I was involved in that I knew. And to be quite honest, it's a lot less challenging than what these other folks have to deal with. But on the other hand, being involved in cases, and I've got 3 other cold case murders that Arcadia has kind of claimed first shot at, and I'm writing one now on a local murder that happened in 1987, and I hopefully have 2 more behind that. But it's a lot of difference now. When I wrote this book, actually, I wrote the book 20 years ago when I was involved in the case. And that, especially when you become, I always like to, the first thing I would do if I was investigating an old homicide was get to know the people that were affected the most by it. Go to the family, the loved ones. And you also get a lot of insight on what may have happened then. But you also become invested in the pain and the abandonment that these people feel because of, you know, never being able to find justice. And because of that, I feel like that part of being part of that story makes the book compelling, you know. You get the feel that just how invested the person, in this case, myself, gets in these cases. And anybody, you know, first thing people will tell you when you're an investigator, you don't want to get personally involved in a case. Well, if the case is 30 years old and every witness in it's dead and most all the evidence is gone, if you don't get invested in it, you can go back home and watch the ball game. And hopefully Alabama will lose. But, you know, again, I pretty much wrote by the seat of my pants. I would come home at night as this case progressed, and it was over a fairly short length of time. I started on this case in 2002, and we were trying, the first trial date on it was in late 2003. And right behind it came another one, and then another one, and then another one. And I was just truly blessed. But the way this book got published is I wrote it and didn't do anything with it except had it in a loose leaf binder stuck on the shelf at home. And I went to a dove shoot here in LaGrange, and creative writing instructor at the college at the time. Actually, I think maybe he retired by then. And he'd been published, and he actually, and I didn't know this, John had actually, had workshops on how to get books published. And, he was telling me about, we were sitting there after the dove shoot at the later session, and, he said, he was talking about this book he had published on, jazz performers in the Atlanta area. And just off the cuff, was sitting there about 3 beers too many, and said, gee, Doc, I wrote a book. And he said, looked at me like, yeah, boy, I want to see your dish. And, he said, well, I'd like to read it. I thought he thought it'd be a comedy. It probably was, didn't it? But the next weekend, we had a game supper, and I brought the book. In a few days, John called me and said, hey, he said, he was amazed, I think. He said, have you ever tried to get this published? And I said, no, sir, I really don't know anything about it. And he said, well, I did. And he said, would you mind if I submitted it for you? Knock yourself out, you know? And within a month, maybe not even that long, a guy named Mike Cartrell with History Press called me and said, hey, we'd like to talk to you about publishing your book. And the rest is history. It took about another 30 or 40 days, and I was able to put all the illustrations and stuff together and place them where I wanted in the book. And next thing I couldn't even spell author now or one. But because of my ties to the case and to the people and the relationships that I garnered during the investigation, I was able to, I think, some of this book is really hard. It's brutal. And some of it's hard to read. But ain't a word in it's not true. And it was hard to write. And part of that was because I incorporate a lot in what I write and where I came from. I was raised on the Siegel police car by a small town police chief, and he was somewhere between Andy Griffith and Chief Gillespie and Will Roger. You know, he had something to say about everything in the world, and it was just a tremendous upbringing for me. And, it relates to the book. And the next one that I'm writing now, which is a murder that happened here in 1987. I hope to do this, incorporate the same types of things in it. And that's pretty much the story of that book. And behind it, we got this book, of course, was a murder that occurred in 1970. The next two were both of those were in 1987. And to speak to, there are times in the book, in this book, and any other cases I've dealt with, where I'd absolutely be at an impasse, could not, where in the world are you going to find the answer that you need? And then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, boom, it would seem like no other reason in the world except divine intervention. There's what I would need to perceive. And, I guess to put it simply, I don't think God likes ugly, And sometimes if you work hard and work toward right, sometimes you can find it. And I would like to think that this book and the ones to come are stories of that.
Well, Clay, one of the things that I looked at in here, that I saw in here, was you said 1970 is when when she was found in the well. And I read in the research on this, you were raised, running in and out of your dad's police car all the time, going to and fro with him. But this is one time he said, hey, come on with me, son. And you actually, as a 15-year-old, witnessed this event taking place.
Again, the only thing I can say is divine intervention. This murder happened literally as far as from here to across the street outside the city of Hogan. There was absent from the time it was committed. There was no mystery about who did it. And the only way that you could describe the reason it wasn't prosecuted was, for whatever reason, and you can read some of that in the book, they didn't want to prosecute. And this poor woman, she was married at 15, she was dead at 30, 4 children. One miscarriage, it was beaten out of her. It was the most long-standing domestic violence case that I have ever heard of. But my dad we were in the police department. It was August the 3rd, 1970. I think I was in the 9th grade in school, freshman in high school. We were sitting there, and my dad said, "Come on, son, right out here with me. Give me the turn ties." He said, "They found a lady in a well, and they want me to come out there and take some photographs for them." The sheriff's office did. Well, we got there, and sure enough, the lady was in the well, and I watched them retrieve her body out of the well. And, and it was one of those situations where every day, you thought, well, the guilty party is gonna be arrested, and something's gonna happen, and it just never did. And every time my dad would see that guy, he'd say, he ought to be on death row in Tattenall County. And it just ate away at him. Well, time rolled along, and I graduated from school, and so while I was working in law enforcement, went to college, and then I went to law school. I'm completely wasted a good legal but I was having fun being a cowboy, And so I went to work for the district attorney's office as investigator in 2002. On October the 15th. On October the 24th, I get a phone call from the sheriff's office. A friend of mine, Larry Anderson's investigator, he says, "Clay," said, "I got a lady in my office. She found the death certificate of an aunt in Hogansville that was thrown in the well. The death certificate's marked homicide, got the injuries described on it, He said, "Do you know anything, have any recollection of it?" He said, "There's absolutely no record this has ever happened here." I said, "Not only do I have a recollection of it, I was standing there when she came out of the well. What's the chance of that?" So that's how we embarked on this case. And she had a son, actually she had 4, but one of them was just a year younger than me. We all went to Hogansville schools, we wasn't 30, 40 folks in the class at the time. And I knew him very well. And I never will forget him, and they looked like stair steps. Him and his brother standing beside that well watching his mother retrieve out of that hole in the ground. And it was a terrible scene. And when I got that call, it was just like you watching a movie of it again. And I said about that point, so nothing right was ever done about this. We're gonna give this a shot. I went to DA at Peach County Lacus, and I said, "I really want to do this." And he said, "Well, knock yourself out." And we did, and it was a roller coaster ride for nearly a year. And it was during that time that I wrote the book. And in the end, we arrested the guy, took off, and he kept putting it off, because of some health situation. And anyway, he actually passed away prior to us getting tried. But if there's ever been a person that I hope's getting the justice that he deserved, I hope he is right now. Forgiveness is a good thing, but I think there comes a time when you need to pay for the things that you've done. And this book, and hopefully 3 more down the road, will be chronicles of the same thing. But I really, in writing the book, once I get home at night, it beats, what you did that day and the things that it brought back, to
in your case, well, Matt, you talked about the plotter, the pantser. This one here is just rewriting what he already knew. You know, and that is an interesting, you know, way to write it. You have a ladder of history. That's 52 years from the time that she was pulled out of the well in 1970. Here we are in 2022. You know, that you went through this process, and it was not all consecutive, because obviously you were there as a 15-year-old, and then you come back to this years later. But still, I have to assume, I mean, all of us think about being 15. How vivid is all those memories, you know? Would you say that memory of that afternoon pulling that lady out of the, you know, Gwendolyn out of the well, did that stick with you for a long, long, long time?
Yes, it did, but, you know, it's like losing a member of your family or anything else. There comes a point when you have to move on from something, you know? Anybody that says, and this is one thing that I always work toward with folks, you know, well, this family needs closure. There ain't no such thing as, when you start talking about the loss of people in your life that you love dearly and those type of things, closure doesn't happen. You might get a little numb and get past it, but closure, you don't close that book. And there are things in our memory that, and this was just something that I came up with, I guess my contribution to forensic. There's a thing called landmark memory. That's what I call it. You know, what were you doing the third day of January of 2006? God, who knows? Where were you on September the 11th?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was burned in your head. You know exactly where you were, what you were doing. You know exactly where you were when your mom or your dad passed. Those things never leave you. And that's where I always like to start. Because you pick up some of that baggage and you start to understand them and flying. You know, some of the things that the book I'm working on now, for 20 years was a missing person. And we were lucky enough to recover the gentleman's body, and their family was able to bury him. And we were able to successfully prosecute folks that the woman was killed. And it's just a tremendous sense of accomplishment. And I hope the book reflects, you know, favorably on what we made happen.
Well, you did a fabulous job in writing the book and retelling the story, and I think it'll grip all of you. So, does anybody have a particular question you'd like to ask direct to Clay at this particular moment? Anybody? Yes.
How hard was it for you to go back? Not only you're pulling up memories of when she was pulled out of the well, you knew those children because you were, you know, that age. But to go back and remember how it affected your dad, that had to be a hard part of this, I would think.
It was. My dad was, you know, and you'll read in the book, he had his crosses to bear like everybody else did. And my dad for years was an alcoholic. And I guess once you're an alcoholic, you never un-alcoholic. But he got to where, in the latter part of his life, he put that down. But he was a right-minded guy. And he was always, it didn't matter who you were, what your status of life was, he'd make time for you, you know? And as I wrote this book, I thought more of him, you know, than I had in 30 years. And it was, that made writing a book easy, you know?
Anybody else? All right. Well, I want, you know, appreciate everybody's response to all of this. I appreciate everyone here. Josh back there's copies of all of the books are back there by the sales counter. And he even snuck a couple, one of mine in the backyard, I guess, too. If you like a little mystery thing, a small town, but I won't get into that. This is their day, not mine. These authors are going to be up here, around the front up here. If you like to come and meet with them, if you purchase a book and would like to get the book signed, which I hope you do,
all authors, you know, we practice that signature so much. You know, come on back and for the next 30 minutes or so and meet with them and get their book signed. I want to thank everybody for this great turnout for our first hometown novel program here in LaGrange. I want to thank Josh Rigsby again. We look forward to many more visits back down here to LaGrange. Back down, just a little piece down the road from Newnan, Georgia. So thank you very, very much. And please, let's give a round of applause for these boys.
Thank you.
What?
You ever thought about, I heard y'all talking earlier about, you ever thought about the extras for like at Alabama?
I don't think I need it. I think their championships speak for itself. What do you think? I really, bring it up. I'm not conscious about it, but I can't be rude when the opponent went out and got the slide.